Let's take a look at one of the most important parts of your building, both aesthetically and functionally, the roof. How do you decide what type of roof you want? Let's look at a couple different types of roofs we might have considered for this project. The first is the simplest, the shed roof, just a single pitch. The next is a double pitch roof, a gable roof, which usually involves commercial trusses, although you can make them yourself. And the third we might have considered is something with a little bit more of a vaulted ceiling using scissor trusses. Those are all great options for what we build for a roof. But we also need to think about, are we making a sealed roof where the insulation goes all the way from the underside to the decking, which is a non-breathing roof, or are we going to make a breathing roof, which has an air channel that runs up top just underneath the roof decking and allows airflow up there just above the insulation? And why would we consider one or the other? For our purposes, we're going to stick with a breathing roof because we live in a climate where it's pretty extreme and it goes from being pretty warm to super, super cold all in the same day, which means we get a lot of moisture condensation in our air. And we're not confident in our ability to keep moisture out of our insulation space in our ceiling unless we do something like spray foam insulation, which is expensive and requires a specialist to install. A couple real advantages for a gable roof are not only do you have that big insulation space and a big air channel so everything dries out, but you also have a lot of room for utilities, and you usually have the ability to go back in and modify your utilities later. Something like these scissor trusses, which give you that vaulted ceiling, still have a little bit of that space and that air channel for you to work in. If you do a shed roof like we did on our house, you have to get all your utilities in before you close everything up. And you have to get them right, so it's a pretty limiting process. But with these I-joists, we got decent insulation and a cheaper roof build for our whole house. Our first design for the studio was a simple shed roof design. The first thing we had to determine was how steep did we want to make the roof. So that angle up there, whether you're making it super steep or super shallow, is your pitch, the angle at which your roof rises. That's generally told in a number of inches of rise over inches of run. So for example, on our building, we were considering a 212 roof or a 112 roof, which would be 2 inches of rise over 12 inches of run, or 1 inch of rise over 12 inches of run. And that was based on our snow loads. So for that, we went ahead and we would have looked at what we were going to use for our rafters, and we would have done a basic notching system or a bird's mouth in it. The reason we would have cut a bird's mouth into our rafters is because it would have saved us money and still achieve the same structural result. You can also buy metal plates or Simpson ties for this process. But our bird's mouth would have been cut to the pitch we were desiring, and that notch sitting on our walls would keep the rafter from trying to slide down and shoot off our wall. It's a real important structural component. There are lots of great YouTube videos and books that'll show you how to do easy bird's mouth notches for your rafters. Building trick here, when you make something like a rafter with the bird's mouth that you like, make sure you go ahead and label that as a template. And don't mark every one just based on measurements. If you know it fits and you've checked it in multiple places, use that as a template, scribe it onto your new boards, and cut that out from there. On this greenhouse project, I went ahead and cut out my bird's mouth. I'll clean up that little notch of wood out later. And then I loaded them up onto my wall and put them up. One of the things that you need to consider going between each of your rafters is blocking. That's the pieces I'm putting in between. That both seals your roof from things coming in on the end and provides structure between all your rafters. In some roofs, I'll add blocking at any of my roof decking seams, the OSB I'm going to put on my roof. In the case of this greenhouse, I'm not super concerned about the structure, so I won't be adding that blocking. I'm more concerned about the minimal insulation I have, so I'm leaving my channels open. Another important thing to consider in your roofing is the overhang, because those overhangs are what are going to help protect the sides of your building from weathering. In this case, I'm cutting out a space for lookouts, and I'm actually attaching it to the subsequent rafter on my building because that's the strongest way to do lookouts, and this is a really windy location with a lot of west wind uplift. Once you have your rafters installed, you're going to be putting decking on top, and this will really unify your whole roof. You'll also notice here that I'm actually staggering my seams. My OSB sheets aren't all lining up on the left edge. I'm making sure to break seams over the top. That makes my roof both stronger and it keeps from having a major shear point on my roof panel and a major leak point when I go ahead and tape all these seams. Time for that building code reminder. Know what your requirements are for your roofing and your roofing attachment. So in addition to all of the places that we've screwed or nailed down our roofing members to our building, we're going to go ahead and add the hurricane ties. These are the metal ties that help attach our roof to our building in case of high wind uplift. Know what the requirements are for each hurricane tie, what type of screws or nails you should use, and the schedule you should use. And also make sure to put them on the outside of your building, on your shear panel, not the inside of the building where it's easier. And a reminder, what type of roofing you're using on your final product might change how you design your roof. And we found those crazy aircraft hangar trusses from the 1940s that we decided we would try and use. When we decided to do this, we had to make sure they were long enough to cover our building at a 112 and a 212 pitch. We had to make sure they were structurally sound. And then for the outside ones, we had to come up with some way to seal them and reinforce them. And one of them I had to do some repairs on. So this wasn't a simple decision, and it definitely complicated our roof, and it also meant we were probably going to be able to add less insulation than we were hoping for in the roof structure. But we made that decision based on reusing and the aesthetics, and we'll find out if it was the right decision in the long run. So let's take a look at what that did to our design. We have these cool curved trusses, but we need to make sure we had enough to be structurally sound for our building and our snow loads, which we felt pretty confident in. These were pretty burly trusses, and we had enough of them to span our distances. So great, we're good there. But then how are we going to insulate them, and what are we doing for the ceiling? We first painted and sealed the plywood sheets that were going to be our finished ceiling, and then we taped all the seams on those, so we had an air barrier for our ceiling. Then we calculated the biggest lumber we could get away with as cross members was going to be 2x8s, or 7¼ inches tall. That would allow us to add insulation and still have a breathing air channel. The reason we wanted a breathing air channel in this roof is because if moisture goes through the ceiling and you have a sealed air channel, it has nowhere to escape from. And we weren't confident in our ability to make a sealed roof without spray foam insulation, which is expensive and requires a specialist. One of the problems is our lower roof butts right up against a wall. So we don't have the same venting as we do on our upper loft roof, which can just go straight from one side to the other. So how we went ahead and solved that is we still had the air coming in from the east side through all of our 2x8 rafters. But when it got towards that wall where it clearly can't exhaust, we went ahead and put a notch in the 2x8s on the far side and all of those to create an air channel that goes up and over from the north to the south of the roof. So our air comes in the east side and then goes up and over through the notch and down out the south side. So here we are adding the 2x8s on top of the plywood that we've already taped and getting them all in place, making sure that they're all equidistant from each other and they have blocking that's the right height to still allow an air channel on the east and the west sides, because remember, we're venting on this upper roof from the east to the west. And then in addition, last piece of 2x8, we're going to add lookouts, because remember, we don't want water coming straight down our building face. And this just means we're cutting small scraps of 2x8 and adding them at intervals along the blocking so our roof will overhang and drip past the edge of our building. Unlike on the greenhouse, where I notched in my lookouts into the subsequent board, on our prevailing big west winds, we have full-length 2x8 rafters running. So our lookouts are just toe screwed into the north and the south side of our building. One of the things we really limited ourselves with when we chose this roof assembly was the amount of insulation we could put in. And remember, before we close up this roof, because we can't get back into it because it's not a gable roof with access, we need to block out. I blocked out the wood stove there in the far corner because we're going to have a chimney coming up. So once this thing is sealed, I'm not getting back into it. So make sure you know everything that's going into your roof. We also have staggered seams on our OSB for structure, but in this case, we're going to be adding a peel and stick roofing over the whole thing because of this crazy curved roof, so I don't need to tape my seams in the same way I did on the greenhouse. Looking at the breathing channel in this roof, this is looking straight from east to west, but we had to add a 1x to keep our insulation down so it didn't just poof up and touch our roof and cause moisture and condensation problems there. In addition, for our breathing channel, we added this black funny vented stuff, which is Corvent. The core vent is on the outside of the metal Margot and I are installing here, so it's remaining as an open air channel, but it's screened to keep insects and birds from trying to go nest or crawl into our airspace and create mayhem in our roof.